Star Wars Battlefront, the classic collection, has really taken the internet by storm, and I'm kind of surprised of how much of a positive reaction it's been. I mean, obviously I know everyone loves Battlefront, but the hype surrounding this re-release has probably been the biggest of any of the Star Wars re-releases so far, and there's actually been quite a lot of them. And I also want to give a huge thank you to all of you who watched my last two videos and subscribed to the channel. This is honestly like the biggest burst of views and subscribers I've probably had since Battlefront 2 was released or something like that, and I honestly didn't even think my channel still had that potential. So huge thank you to all of you who watched, as well as all of you who have so far purchased the Battlefront Classic merch from my website sheev.shop. But one question that I have been asked so much the last 48 hours is, does this mean we might be getting a Battlefront 3? Are we getting a continuation of EA's Battlefront 2? Is Aspyr making a Battlefront 3? So many questions asking if this could be the potential first step of a revival of the Battlefront franchise. And that's something I really wanted to dig into in this video and hopefully give you my honest answer on this and a realistic answer instead of just building up potentially false expectations. If you're interested in the actual details of the Battlefront Classic collection, I've already got 2 videos going through those in detail, even the new modes coming, DLC content and all that kind of stuff, so you'll find those videos on my channel. But today we're focusing more on the future of this franchise, and does this release have anything to do with a potential future of this franchise? So first of all, let's get one thing straight. This is simply a re-release that Aspyr is doing for the 2 classic Star Wars Battlefront games. They've done similarly for Republic Commando, KOTOR 1 and 2, Star Wars Jedi Knight Jedi Academy, among a bunch of other Star Wars games, some of which have just been ported to the Switch and others have been released on all platforms. And I think something that's important to note here is that they're basically just polishing up and updating the old games. They aren't adding new content, they aren't creating a game from scratch. So to compare it to making, let's say, a Battlefront 3 is not really realistic. We're talking like completely different spectrums of how much development time, developers and resources you need to create a brand new project from scratch compared to just updating an old game. I'm not saying it's like a 5-man job to do this. It obviously takes a lot of work, but they still have all the base stuff already done 20 years ago. They just have to polish it up and make sure that it actually works on all the modern consoles. And it's not like all of these re-releases they've done have had anything to do with the future of those franchises. I mean, maybe to some degree. For instance, they did the KOTOR re-releases, which I think was initially probably planned to be around the same time that the new KOTOR remake would happen. Unfortunately, this KOTOR remake went into development hell. And the interesting thing is that it was actually supposed to be made by Aspyr. So Aspyr was tasked to make this game from scratch. As obviously a remake, you can't really reuse any assets at all except for the storytelling. But apparently Disney was not happy with what Aspyr were doing, so that project was then moved to Saber Interactive, and since then we haven't really heard much. So whether or not that project is happening is really hard to say. So Aspyr went back to just creating simple re-releases to Star Wars games and other games too. So I would say that the easy answer to whether or not Aspyr will be making another Battlefront game, no, that's not happening. They neither have the resources, probably not the willingness or the skill set to create a game of that scope, considering that I would argue making a Battlefront 3 would be way harder than making a KOTOR remake, since a KOTOR remake you at least have a very nice foundation to stand on of exactly what the story is gonna be and things like that, whereas a Battlefront 3 is just gonna be immense. It's gonna have to do so many stuff in order to please the player base. But what about Battlefront overall? Does this franchise have any future? And the thing is, I don't think right now there are any plans for a new Battlefront game. EA and DICE, specifically DICE to be honest, seems to have no interest in touching Star Wars or Battlefront again. The majority of the development team who worked on Battlefront 2 left when they shut down the Battlefront franchise. And since then, they've made it very clear that they just want to focus on Battlefield. They are working on Battlefield 2042, they're working on a new Battlefield game, so that DICE and EA were to make a new Battlefront game, Probably not happening. So what about Disney or Lucasfilm tasking a completely different publisher in making Battlefront? That's honestly a little bit more realistic, but I'm not sure if the Battlefront franchise or the license is at all tied to EA, because obviously Lucasfilm owns basically everything Star Wars, but since EA still made the Battlefront stuff, it's hard to say how exactly that works. But whether or not someone else actually wants to make a Battlefront game, that's the question. It's an extremely high-risk game and franchise to touch. There's been so many fails within it, so many cancellations, and there are probably no other Star Wars franchise with as high expectations as Battlefront does. A Battlefront 3 would need to check so many boxes to just pass an okay level in the community, and I think that's kind of why the franchise is sort of doomed. However, we all know how CEOs, higher-ups work. They look at what makes money, what sells. So if this Battlefront Classic Collection sells really, really well, probably more so than all of the other Star Wars re-releases, they might start scratching their heads. They might start thinking, damn, this franchise is really popular. They already know that Battlefront 2 by EA and DICE sold incredibly well and had a very, very solid player base, even though the monetization was kind of screwed over by the loot boxes that they had to remove and couldn't really put a better system in place. But they obviously already know that Battlefront is a very popular franchise, and if this old re-release of a 20-year-old game sells really, really well, it's just another thing that proves how much popularity this franchise has. Like honestly, if you just look at the trailer views for the Battlefront Classic Collection compared to some of the other Star Wars re-releases, it just shows how much bigger this franchise is than, I would honestly argue, pretty much any other Star Wars franchise. Except maybe like the Lego Star Wars franchise, hard to say. Nevertheless, my point with this video is that I do not think there are current plans for a Battlefront 3, a Battlefront 2 revival, or really any Battlefront game. But I do think that they do keep track of both how the previous Battlefront 2 by EA did, how many players it still has, and definitely how well this Battlefront Classic Collection will sell. Because now that it's going to be available across all platforms, I'm expecting this to by far be the biggest Star Wars re-release so far. And there's no way they're going to ignore the fact that if they sell millions of copies of this, they need to look into making a new Battlefront game. Honestly, something I've discussed a lot in the past is that just a Star Wars multiplayer shooter would be fine by most of us. We're talking about something to fill the Battlefront 2 gap, and if creating a new franchise that is a Star Wars shooter means less unrealistic expectations and more freedom for the developers, I think that's probably a good idea, as long as it still scratches that same itch that Battlefront has always done. But in the end, if they wanna break sales record and probably the most sold Star Wars game of all time, all they gotta do is make Battlefront 3. Will it be hard? Yes. Will it cost a lot of money to make it? Hell yes. It will definitely be the most expensive Star Wars game ever to be done. And is there a lot of risk involved? Yes, it is. But if they pull it off and they find the right developer that creates the right content that's fair to the players and that can still make money, they will without a doubt break the record for the most sold Star Wars game copies ever. I am willing to bet my channel on that. It just has to be done correctly by the right people, and people will throw their money at that game. Anyways, I would love to hear in the comments below what kind of continuation of the Battlefront franchise are you hoping for, and do you think I'm being a little bit too pessimistic here? Is there actually secret plans to make a new Battlefront game, or are you on the other spectrum where you think it's just never gonna happen? Thank you very much for watching, and as always, may the Force be with you.
What?